out of Virginia. I'm in the Shenandoah Valley, land that was occupied by the Monacan. And today we are hosting from here some amazing guests from the Biden side and from the MMT side, the side that had been advising Senator Sanders, that then joined on the Joint Policy Task Force Committee to try to take on the grave issues that are facing our country. My name is Panagiotis Yanakouros, and I will be moderating tonight. I am a scholar at the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, and I have been working on one of the themes that's in our headline, modern money theory. And in a moment, I'll tell you a little bit about that. But we have panelists here, Marwa El-Taib, who's going to welcome us to Virginia. Then Priya Samant is going to introduce Harry Patel, who are high-level and close advisors to Vice President Biden. And then we have Professor Fadl Taboub, the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. They all will tell us a few words, and then we will join in discussion. So to open, let me tell you a little bit about the one thing that might not be entirely clear to everybody, and that's this notion of modern money theory, which is the economic framework that many of us work out with. So for that, I'll use a little graphical aid. It's a way to think about how our national currency works. So often you'll hear policymakers ask, we need to do certain things, but how are we going to pay for it? The conventional way of answering that question through the end of the 20th century ended up not being very satisfactory. For the past 20 years, a group of economists have been working on an approach that proved to be clearer and that proved to be more robust to explaining things like the great financial collapse and explaining how it is that during the COVID crisis, we've been able to mobilize such enormous financial resources. So the basic idea is that in a country like the United States, that has internal sovereignty, we are able to issue a currency by simply making it receivable in payment of taxes. And if that's all we're promising for our currency, we can issue as much currency as we need to make any purchase that we would like to make. We're limited only by the things that are available to purchase. That simple insight changes many things in economics. So specifically, answering the question of how do we pay for things, in the United States, the Constitution delegates the ability to make payments to Congress, specifically the House of Representatives. And what is the House of Representatives? Well, I have here a Bernie flyer, so full disclosure, I have been involved in the Bernie campaign as a volunteer. We, the voters, with our hands containing a vote, send forward a representative. And that representative sits in Congress with other representatives, and they are presented bills that propose things that we might want to do. And how do they pay for them? If enough vote to pass the bill, they read the number off the bottom of the bill to the Treasury, which communicates it to the Federal Reserve, which credits the appropriate accounts. That's all there is to it. Now, at the end of the day, we can go and tax some of that spending back. That's fine. Often we package things together in the same bill so it looks as if the taxes are paying for the spending. But as we saw in the COVID crisis, we do not need to tax in order to spend. That fundamental insight opens many possibilities. And it is with that understanding that much of the audience brings that I will then introduce the rest of the panelists to speak about the Biden roadmap and to speak about what some of the possibilities are and what some of the challenges are that we'll be facing. So for challenges and possibilities, I will hand it over to Marwa to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Virginia to bring us down to earth.
Hello, thanks for that introduction, Cody. My name is Marwa. I am a national delegate for 2020 in Virginia, and I'm very proud to be a part of this group as we continue to fight toward equality and towards progress in many ways, and to find a better future. So in Richmond right now, there is quite a bit going on. We have a lot of on the ground work fighting towards racial equity. There's a lot going on during our special session in this last in September. We had a special session with our General Assembly focused on police reform and racial equity, and we've gotten quite a bit of new legislation going forward, things such as the Civilian Review Board, which would bring accountability to police officers in Virginia who are found in misconduct. And we also have had a few bills discussing other types of police reform, like banning chokeholds, things of that nature, and then also in terms of Marcus alert system, which would essentially deploy an alternative to police officers and mental health response team out for a mental health issue in Virginia. So that there's a lot of progress going in that way. And also in the community, we have had a lot of action on the ground with different organizations, including mine. We are RV 26 and other groups that are taking it into their own hands by providing community support through mutual aid, through all types of educational experiences and services led by the people. And as someone who was inspired by Bernie Sanders to really fight for the people, it is wonderful to see that that happening on that strong community front. And I'm excited to talk more with you, the Biden campaign, and others here on how we can really bridge that gap and instill confidence in the soon-to-be new administration, and that this administration is genuinely fighting for the people.
Thank you so much, Marwa. Next, to bring in the Biden side, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Priya Samant, who is a member of the Innovation Policy Committee for the Biden for President. She is also a core member of the Rapid Response Team for South Asians for Biden and Hindu Americans for Biden. She has extensive experience in innovation and social entrepreneurship, and I will hand it over to Priya to tell you more about her story and to introduce our very honored guest, Perry Patel.
Thank you so much, PG. It's an honor to be a part of this esteemed panel. So my name is Priya Samant, and I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. So I came in this country 20 years back as an immigrant. So I'm a first generation immigrant. And, I have gone through the whole cycle of immigration to be a US citizen. And this is my third US election in which I will be voting. The first time I voted was in 2012. And in 2016, I got very involved, and I was a member of tech policy team for Secretary Clinton's campaign, and here I am today, being part of the various committees for the Biden campaign. So what I've learned is, I am in last 4 years, what has happened is our community, I belong to the Indian American community, strongly believes we are one of the, if you see in many of the immigrant communities that have come here, our community is one of the affluent communities, and we believe in education. But in last 4 years, what has happened is, there is shift in many areas, and and we believe a lot in science and innovation. And this COVID-19 that has come, it has brought the entire world to the grinding halt. And the way it has turned out, because of the leadership in the United States under the current administration, I mean, things have gone downhill. So what is tomorrow? I mean, most of the American voters have voted. But to those who have yet not voted, I would like to repeat is that science is on the ballot. Compassion is on the ballot. Decency is on the ballot. our democracy is on the ballot. So please think about it, because its lot is at stake. I am a woman of color, and I fear. I'm a mother of two boys, so I fear for the safety and for the future, and I think that's in many households across America. So please, please, it's my humble request for every one of you to see. I am in my own little way, I can be called as America, a success story in America, because in 20 years back when I came to this country, I never thought that I would be sitting one day giving my opinions on a presidential election, but I got this opportunity. And we all can get this opportunity if we are willing to work hard, but we need a leader who can guide us and who needs to be a compassionate leader. And Vice President Joe Biden, embodies all those qualities, and he has a strong, partner in the White House who is going to work with him, who is running on the ticket, which is Kamala Harris, who is a woman of color. Please consider voting for the Biden-Harris ticket. And with that, I would like to introduce a member, a very esteemed member of my Indian American community, Mr. Perry Patel. It's a great honor to introduce you. So Perry Patel is an Indian-born American living in the United States for past 45 plus years. He lives not too far from the home of former US Vice President Joe Biden, also a Democratic candidate for the president in the elections, which will be tomorrow, November 3rd, 2020. Perry has known the Biden family for last 35 plus years, and he has served on the election steering committee and conducted multiple Biden seminars. Perry grew up in Gujarat, India, which is also the home of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And he has known the Prime Minister through Bhaikaka Swatantrata Party, which is now actually called the Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling party of India. Perry has earned his MBA and Master's in Science in the United States and enjoyed a long and fruitful innings of 45 years in healthcare administration and hospitality. He now serves as a consultant with Open Minds. Perry says that he has enjoyed living in Delaware, the home of Vice President Joe Biden. And yesterday I had an honor of hearing Perry, and he is a proud father of three doctors. And we will hear from him that how important this election is. So with that, I would hand it over to Mr. Perry Patel.
Priya, you are so kind, and thank you for that kind introduction. Just want to share with each one of you that I had honor to be close to, maybe I live a couple of miles from the Biden's family. In fact, the family, their older son, Beau Biden, who passed away, he doesn't live too far from his home, so the children go back and forth. And again, I think in order for you to know a person, you have to know where he came from, you have to know the parents that he came. Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, was born in Scranton. He came to Delaware when he was a 10-year-old. His father had a job transfer and there was not as much available in Scranton. When he came to Claymont, he was growing up in a neighborhood, mixed racial neighborhood, where he had opportunity to go to the pool and be the summer pool person at the pool. And that's when he gets started knowing the rest of the other communities and what's going on around it. On top of that, his children's has been the part of the community. As I was involved into Indo-American Association of Delaware for last 30 plus years, they came to each one of the India Fest. They came to the Hindu temple and the opening of it. They came to Sikh and Gurudwara. They came to mosque. They came to churches. So they came, they were out. There was not like that big a deal for us to run into each other in just a casual grocery areas and or the 7-Eleven or Dunkin' Donuts. So they were very accessible to us back growing up. Vice President Biden started his career at the Newcastle County. Luckily, because I'm in a small, and if I say anything about Delaware, it's a small family. So if I'm saying something too much, it's because I'm proud of it and I grew up in it. I wouldn't have thought about it. I'll be a commissioner for the Newcastle County, which I am now. And knowing where he started from it, he was trying to talk to a couple of our other people. Her name is Sonia Salone. She's a Democratic Party. She's almost like a mother to the Democratic Party in Delaware. And Joe, once he got done with his Newcastle County, he was asking Sonia Salone to see if he would be considered for the Senate position. Now, if you know the history of Delaware, we had a strong Republican hold in Delaware for a long, long time. In fact, Senator Roth, as we know him as the Roth IRA, he was a person that was there at one point also. So defeating those kind of caliber of the people were impossible. But that Sonia talked to a couple of people in DC and says, look guys, I know it takes a lot to get a lot of votes from New York City and the senators and those people. I think I have an easy opportunity to see if we could earn the Delaware votes. And that's how Joe Biden got groomed. In the earlier days, Joe Biden did not have a big campaign. In fact, his sister, Valerie Owen Biden, is the one who was running the campaign for the most part. As you know, most of you know, he had tried to be the president for a couple of times earlier. And again, each one of these instances, he learned a lot. He has given so much back to the community in every simple way. His son, who was the Attorney General, he was really looking after for the women's rights. He was looking after for the children's rights. He was in a position, because I also managed the alcohol, drug, and rehab and my healthcare background for the last 20 plus years. He would be able to help us find a site if we have some issues. And he was always there for the little people, and that's what goes a long way. His daughter Ashley is serving at the Department of Justice as a social worker. She's off from last few months just for the election, but she's been serving. And I think you could not be more prouder than Dr. Jill Biden, because she, even while she was in the vice president, she was teaching still at the colleges in Virginia, and some of you probably from Virginia knows more about it than I do. So I would share that he is just a down the earth, simple people. Parents are, you would be really proud of. I had the opportunity to be at the funeral homes for Joe Biden's mother. I was good opportunity to be at the funeral home for Jill Biden's mother. So I could see the family. I have grown with them. Another good thing is I was traveling to DC for my consulting work, and we ride the same train. So it's not like unusual to see each other and meet each other and have the casual conversation. So I'll stop at that point and answer any other questions that PG or anybody you have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Patel, and thank you so much, Priya, for those moving stories. I should mention, based on what you've said, that it reminds me of why I'm here. Yes, I know MMT from a long time back, but the real reason I'm here is because of the hands of those people who sent me forward as a state delegate. And I had the great privilege to be able to visit their homes, to door knock, paying respect, to be honest, in the non-conforming trailer courts, in the apartments under the railroads, where people lived. Those people didn't have great choices in where they lived, didn't have choices in how they worked, but I knew that they were making a better world for us with their votes. And a few weeks after I visited them, they started getting sick. And so the issues you raise are so compelling. And I will hand it over to Fadl Kaboub to outline a little more of the economic landscape, so that we can open a discussion on the way forward with the administration. Fadl Kaboub, it is my great pleasure to introduce, is a longtime friend for me. He is the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, which has contributed significantly to the economics behind what is known as the Green New Deal. Dr. Kaboub is an expert on the global context from the macroeconomic and environmental perspective, and has at hand extensive statistics on people, planet, and prosperity to outline the crisis I alluded to. And it's, in particular, it's racialized disparate impacts, on which Marwa touched on a little bit. So with that, it is my great privilege, my great honor, and my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Fadl Kaboub.
Thank you, Podi, for hosting this event, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't express how intense this moment is for all of us in this country and beyond, to be honest. I grew up originally in the Middle East, and I constantly get text messages from friends all over the world saying, we're with you. We're waiting for what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think this is very clear for all of us on this call, for people watching us online. Another 4 years of Trump is going to be a disaster for the United States, a disaster for the world, for the following reasons, because we're facing multiple crises locally here in the United States and globally. We have a pandemic crisis, a public health crisis in the US and beyond. We have a climate crisis. We literally have, a handful of years left to take bold, transformative action to mitigate the climate risks that we're dealing with. We have a socioeconomic exclusion crisis in this case, in this country, that's been, coming out, to kind of in the public eye on a much larger scale over the last few months, primarily because people who lost their jobs happen to be people of color for the large part, because of the police brutality that we've seen over the last few months. So all of these multiple crises require bold leadership, transformative action at the national level and at the global level. And if we're talking at the global level, we're not going to wait for a small developing country to take leadership in technological transformation and decarbonizing the world economy and moving us forward on the climate front. There's no in position. So that means a Biden administration is going to have a lot of responsibilities, and it's going to have to work on multiple fronts, locally and nationally and internationally. The question then becomes, how transformative can this administration's intervention be? And there's two things we have on the table here, two approaches on the table. One that says there isn't enough money to pay for all of these transformative things at once. We're going to have to take it one piece at a time, kind of incrementalist, gradualist approach to dealing with these multiple crises. The other approach says, wait a minute, there's plenty of potential. We can actually tackle these things. We can afford them without bankrupting the country, without causing inflation. We can actually transform the system and thrive collectively and prosper collectively. So this is really what I wanted to unpack here today in the next few minutes. And I'm often reminded and inspired by the words of Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, in the context of the civil rights movement, he said, I have no time for the tranquilizing drug of gradualism and incrementalism. Think about it. Incrementalism and gradualism in the climate crisis context, in the pandemic context, in terms of economic relief, locally here in the US and globally, small incremental solutions will not transform the system fast enough to provide relief and prosperity for people who have suffered for a long time. So the question becomes, do we have the economic tools to truly transform this? And the good news is that in the US, we've done this before. We've done it during World War II. It was a massive transformation. Remember, World War II came right after the Great Depression, the most miserable time in US history. There was no money to be taxed. There was no money to be borrowed. And yet we went into this massive mobilization to win World War II in a very short amount of time. Massive economic transformation. We didn't bankrupt the country. We didn't slip into socialism or communism. If anything, the post-war boom was the golden age for the United States. So we can do this again. The second example I want to highlight is sending a man to the moon, right? Even the scientists at the time said, when JFK said we're going to send a man to the moon in less than 10 years or in 10 years, even the scientists said we don't even have the tools yet. But we set it as a national priority. We put our minds to it. We put the money on the table. We set it as a national priority, and look at all the technological things that came out of it, which was not part of the plan, and all the prosperity that came out of that massive commitment to a particular national goal, right? This is where we are today. We have to set a clear target to address all of these crises that we have, set the priorities straight, and then talk about, can we afford it? And the answer is yes. Then the answer comes from the MMT perspective, or modern monetary theory perspective, which I'm sure many people have seen and heard about it in the news. And there's lots of criticism and lots of misrepresentation. So hear me out in the next 2 minutes, and I'll give you the kind of the shortest, clearest explanation, because this has the potential to truly allow us to unleash this potential for the United States and beyond. And the economics profession, by the way, is undergoing this potential paradigm shift, the MMT framework versus the traditional way we usually think about what is affordable for the federal government. So the standard view for mainstream economics and politics, and all of us have been kind of taught these principles, is the following. We're told that the spending capacity of the federal government is limited by tax revenues and borrowing capacity. That's it. That's as far as we can go. Meaning that, we're going to have to tax somebody to pay for things. We're going to have to borrow from somebody to pay for things, and which means we're constrained. And MMT is essentially saying that spending capacity is actually much, much larger than that. It's not limited by tax revenues as spending capacity. And we're not saying it's unlimited. It is constrained, but it's much larger than that, especially for the United States. So what is the true constraint? The true constraint is the risk of inflation. And we've known this for a long time. During World War II, when the spending happened for the war effort, the main thing that everybody was concerned about, the economists, government officials, was that risk of inflation. How do we spend more and build more capacity without hitting against that risk of inflation? So what determines that risk of inflation? It's two things. One comes with good news. The second one comes with a little bit more challenging news. So the first risk of inflation is when we run out of productive capacity. If we run out of doctors and nurses and hospitals and equipment and technology and skilled people, then we start bidding up prices and cause inflation. The good news about that is that productive capacity is producible, which means we invest in people, we invest in infrastructure, we invest in education and vocational training to increase our productive capacity so we can build more without creating inflation. The second risk of inflation is a bit more challenging and a bit more political, which means we have to face it head on. The second risk of inflation, according to MMT, comes from too much market power, too much price-setting behavior in key industries where you can have, key corporations, key individuals who can raise prices simply because they can, because they have too much market power. That kind of inflation risk can't be eliminated by spending less and saying we're not going to address the crises, but it can only be eliminated by democratizing that market, by making it more competitive. And that's where lawmakers become important, because their job is to regulate markets. That's why we regulate utilities. That's why we regulate monopolies, right? So that's how you democratize that space. And if you tame that risk of inflation, then we've just increased our spending capacity by a substantial amount. And that's the only way we're going to be able to economically afford, to address all of these crises that we have in the United States and address them quickly, right? And this is the leadership that the US can take in opening the way for the rest of the world to recognize that spending capacity is not constrained in the way we've been told in the past. Now, it's not unlimited spending capacity, and it varies from country to country. But the mechanics and the MMT lens that I just described allows us to clearly measure or estimate how much spending capacity we have, and then how can we increase that spending capacity by investing in the right direction and the right people and the right industries, and democratizing and making markets more transparent and more competitive. And that's where regulatory frameworks become very important. So I'll leave it at that as kind of the initial pitch. And it's an open invitation for everybody following us here online or on YouTube and Facebook to engage in this discussion about the affordability of addressing these multiple crises. If we're going to have a livable planet, if we're going to have prosperity for all, if we're going to have social justice, economic justice, we're going to have to put money on the table, set the priorities straight, and avoid the traditional view that says we're very limited by how much money we have. Now, if you're a city mayor, if you're a state governor, if you're talking at the local level, this discussion is not for you. This is the federal government that has that additional spending capacity. The power of the purse is in the hand of Congress, not the local county officials and city officials. They operate just like you and I. They have to be responsible. They have to tax in order to spend. They have to borrow whatever the markets allow them to borrow. And then they have a real financial burden to pay off that debt. So everything I described is for the federal government. And that's why we need leadership at the national level. With that, I'm happy to answer questions and engage in conversation with our guests.
Thank you very much, Fadl. And I open it for discussion among the panelists. Very eager to hear your thoughts, Mr. Patel. Others, please put comments in the chat or in the questions, especially in the questions. It's easier for me to see it in that panel. But Mr. Patel, I will hand over to you if you have thoughts immediately, and then I have many questions for you.
Thank you much for that. Dr. Kaboub, I think you put it nicely, and I think that's what it takes for the leadership. You can't do one piece of the puzzle and not to deal with the other puzzles, because it is the totality is what we need. And somebody like Joe Biden, who has done this before, he grew up in the poverty, he has seen what it is like, and then going into the Obama administrations, in the first few weeks when they were there were not plenty of resources there. We were coming out or getting into the recessions. We had limited resources. But even to take the resources that we had and to bail out some of those industries that were struggling, that is a sort of kind of a, when you look at it, that compared to the Trump administration, they walked into the Obama's plantations of the trees. They just have to rip the trees and get the fruit for it, because everything was laid out, it was there. Each one of the programs, when you look at it, that the joebiden.com has, you would find that it is really a balancing act that you would find. Whether it is investing into the solar energy, whether it is dealing with the environmental issues that we are dealing with it, whether it is we are dealing with the peace accord that we have, whether we are talking about social injustice, whether we are dealing with the opioid crisis. And with what the COVID-19 has done is we have, that is the biggest challenge we have to deal with it right now today. If America would be healthy and we would have all of the 345 million people who would be more of a productive paid in tax employees, I believe our tax revenue would drastically increase. And again, as you said, you don't have to spend only to the extent where the elasticity goes. I believe you are absolutely right. There is a little bit room that we could spend a little bit more, as long as we are in a position to shift from one to another, whether it is a taxable income for one break versus the different brackets. Those could all be managed within the system, because if we don't pay attention to any one of these pieces that are out there, they are all going to come back one day, and then the price that we would pay for those pieces, we would not have enough resources to even put a band-aid on it. So I think your approach, your economic theory, by all means makes sense, and I think we have to find more things that we could get behind and get everybody moving in the right directions. And we had leaders previously that has done it, and I'm sure when you look at the caliber of the people that we are having coming on, God willing tomorrow, if the Vice President Biden were to win with Kamala Harris, I believe they have the ability. They both have seen the roots of where they came from, and what does it take. In order for you to understand average person, you have to put yourself into their shoes, and that is the only way you could understand where they are coming from it. So somebody who has to have really the thoughts that how could you step into all of the 345 million people's shoes to understand. As you see today, what we have, economy only works for one person and one person's only. I believe if you go around the country, 40% of the businesses because of the COVID are struggling and are closing, while that one person's businesses are not struggling. So I think the economy has to work for all of the 345 million people, not just one person in the White House. And that's where we are at today. And I think that change alone, and even if they do what they do, I think if you put even 8 hours, good 8 hours job, and that is President Trump, I think we would have a different outcome. We would have probably have some solutions to the COVID-19. We would have probably have some thought processes on some of the things. When we talk about the ACA, what are we going to do the 20 plus million people that are going to come off the ACA in next 10-15 days if we don't have a plan for them? But these are the things you just can't work in the vacuum. Look at what the social unrest is going on in the country. This is no way of running a country. It has to be thoughtfully. Even a small company that we all are associated with run it, it has a budget, it has a plan, it has a structure, it has a project management. All these things, even knowing what we all know in a low ways, I think they have to be applied on a country in a large scale, and that's the only way we could move ahead. And I feel very confident with the administration that we are having on horizon. I think they have that thought processes, they have that mindset, they are taking everybody along with it. And as Joe Biden had said over and over again, he's not only the Democratic president, he's the president for everybody. And that's the thing that it takes. I believe today when you look at it in the White House, he talks about the red state and blue state and red governor and blue governor. We don't have anything like that. Once you win the elections, this is your country, this is the United States. Everybody has to work together in the right directions. This is a big ship. If everybody is not going in the right directions, we'll never be able to get anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with the overall assessment, but if you don't mind, I'm going to push back on one small thing, and this is for us economists who worry about these details. There's no question about the administration that President Obama led was much better than the Bush administration. There's no question about a Biden administration will be 1,000 times better than what we have today. On the economic front, however, the Obama recovery was shallow and slow, and it could have been much bolder and much more transformative. This is really what I'm talking about when I say small transformative solutions versus bold transformative solutions. And it's the economics team that joined President Obama during that recovery that was part of that tradition that says we have to be careful, we have to go small, and that same team is today changing its position slightly because, as I said, the economics profession is undergoing this paradigm shift, partly because of the MMT framework. Larry Summers, in particular, who was part of that tradition that says we can't go all the way, is now the biggest proponent of fiscal policy and larger spending, without giving credit to the MMT tradition. But I'm not so confident that he's really going as far as, for example, addressing climate change to the full extent of the firepower that the United States has financially. That's what I worry about. I want the Biden team, I want the economic team that's working with him to be much more open to truly transformative solutions and not to think of the lack of financial resources. We say this casually all the time, we don't have resources. But in economics, you have to be very careful. Do you mean financial resources or real resources like people and machines and technology? Financial resources are not constrained in the same way as real resources. We can run out of skilled engineers, but we can't run out of US dollars, which is the power of the federal government to create. That's where our attention should be, on the real resources to create the real change. And that's what MMT is trying to highlight, that the focus should be on people, on technology, on investment and infrastructure, not the dollars that go with that spending.
And Dr. Kaboub, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Only one area that I learned that sort of I don't know whether the lessons to be learned sort of, but in India, the Prime Minister Modi, I don't know how much you're paying attention, but he came in power and he had to make some significant decisions. The country has been there 75 plus years by now from the independence from the British government, and we were struggling. We did not make as much progress as we would have probably liked it to be, although everybody was comfortable, happy that we are better than it was yesterday. So people were sort of complacent, if you know what I mean. And based on all that, I believe he took some bold steps. And I think even today the economy is somewhat struggling, and again this is the economist saying it, that had he not done the demonetizations and or take away the currency out of the circulations, those were the drastic measures that he had to do, the devaluate the rupees. And again, I am not expert in by all means in economy, and I understand the MMT's theory that you are talking about, and I think we need to get on board in some way, shape or form there. But again, I'll just share with you that there are some cautions that some people have seen what had happened in the other part of the world, and maybe that stayed with some people. But again, you're absolutely right. If there was a way that we could see beyond the impossible, and we could see on the other side that there is a hope and there is sort of kind of a calculated risk, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we should go all the way. And that's the only way we will get the faster return on the investment. Because sometimes what happens in business is carrying cost, that the misery, that the time of misery, that takes away too much of the capital, and then it takes away too much of the emotional capital. And that's what we are trying to balance. If we could figure out a way to do it with some confidence that we will be better off on the other side and have that sort of kind of a moment, then I think by all means, today India, if you look at it, the Prime Minister is giving so many pep talk. He comes up with so many ideas. Even the small villages nowadays are having the industries. The woman power is being taking over majority of the small garments and small industry. So as you see, the country that was dependent even on the food, India was not even dependent on other countries for the food. Now today when you look at it, they are exporting it. So it sort of kind of takes a little bit more thought processes. But somebody like an economist like you, if you could provide the wisdom that there is light on the other side, I believe everybody would get on board. Or it is just the fear that I think we all non-economists has in the way, and that's what I share with you.
It is
Yeah,
very,
and to amplify your point about measurements, I mean, we're not going to have a paradigm shift unless we change also the metric and change the kind of the moral and ethical principles behind the metric that we use. For example, we deal with this all the time. I mean, you look at public opinion polling on clean air, clean water, clean soil, 90+% support for these ideas. But then you ask people, do you support green jobs investment? Then the numbers drop to 50% or 60%, depending. For Trump voters, Biden voters, and so on. So here's the thing. Common sense stuff that everybody understands. And I live in the Midwest. I live in Ohio, so it's deindustrialized. This is an area that's suffered quite a bit in the last 40 years. Socioeconomic dislocation, unemployment, the opioid crisis, you name it. When you talk about spending money to, say, clean up the water source, to invest in clean energy so that we have clean air, clean water, clean soil, the initial thought is, what's going to be too expensive? We're going to lose the fracking jobs and all of that. But then are we taking into account the real cost, the long-term cost? Would we rather spend a little bit of money to invest in clean energy and clean water and clean soil, or not do that because it's too expensive and then pay for it many times over for the next 30 years in cancer treatment for the entire community? Well, of course not. Would we rather invest in after-school programs and summer camps for kids for science and music and inspire them with the arts, or not do that because we think it's too expensive and unaffordable, and then build a prison for those same kids for the next 50 years? Of course we can't afford that. We can't afford the finances. We can't afford the economic pain, the social pain to individuals, to society. So changing the metric away from that short-term immediate economic return to a much more nuanced quality of life measure that we can allow us all of a sudden to shift the narrative. So economists and politicians all the time talk about economic growth, which is that narrow measure by GDP, right? Gross domestic product. And it gets celebrated on TV. They say GDP went up by 2%, let's celebrate. But quality of life didn't necessarily go up by 2% because that GDP includes the prisons, includes the cancer treatment, includes the pollution, includes cleaning up the oil spills. Those are negative impacts on quality of life. So changing the metric will automatically get the majority of the population in favor of investing in schools and education and clean air and clean water. So we need leadership at the national level so we change the metric so that we get the majority of people on board. It's not just Democrats. Republicans also like clean air and clean water, believe it or not. They like good paying jobs, right? But they think that if we're going to pay for those investments with higher taxes, they say, I don't want that, because it's my income is on the line, or my employer, which means my job is on the line. So MMT shifts that narrative because it says we can afford these investments without necessarily having to tax working class and middle class people. So we can afford these things. It's just a complete paradigm shift. And I have to put a plug to my friend's book here. I don't know if you can see it. I have a virtual background. You don't see it. It's called The Deficit Myth. And it's on the New York Times best-selling list for the last several weeks by Stephanie Kelton, who's the leading scholar in the MMT, modern monetary theory space. It's accessible, it's easy to read for anybody in the general public, and just changes your entire perspective on what is affordable and what the potential is for transforming the US economy.
Yes.
Good to know that. Thank you.
Yes, and Stephanie was on a chief advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and then she was on the task force that Vice President Biden convened. And it is heartening to listen to Vice President Biden. It's heartening to hear the resonance between Perry Patel and Fadl Kaboub here on the true measures and the suffering. And Mr. Patel, what you said about fear, and to hear that in Vice President Biden on the debate stage saying with regard to COVID, we're going to do whatever it takes. That sounded like he understood MMT. He could go to the Treasury and do what needed to be done. And in his last debate, he said that the founders, in their wisdom, gave us the ability to deficit spend. So there's hope. We are hopeful that Vice President Biden does understand these issues, and he will help us overcome these fears. As another a great president long ago said something about fear holding us back. I'm looking for questions here. I've got some questions from the audience, if we may. So I have a question from Christina, who says, how are we going to apply the knowledge of MMT and real monetary limits to provide real, equitable economic solutions? And Marwa,
I'll start with the first kind of general answer to this, which I wanted to say anyway before even hearing the question. We've mobilized millions of people. Millions of people have voted. Millions of people will be voting tomorrow. My biggest fear is that the day after, many of our friends and allies will quote unquote go on vacation, check out for the next 40 years. I think that's going to be the biggest sort of disappointment of this mobilization, because we're not just fighting to unseat Trump. We're fighting for our lives in a sense. We're fighting for the future of our children, the future of this country, which means, again, we're reminded of what FDR said when he was, being pushed to take bold action before the New Deal of the 1930s, in the middle of the biggest crisis in the history of the US. He eventually said, I agree with you, now make me do it, which means build up that social movement, that political capital that I need to pass these bills. And that's what the next administration needs. It doesn't need a couple of economic advisors or policy advisors saying this is a good solution. We need to have the social and political mobilization to make that administration successful. Because guess what? It's not just the president. There's going to be people in Congress, senators and congressmen, who need to be convinced. They need to hear from their constituents. They need to be pressured to take bold transformative action on the Democratic side, on the Republican side. So to go back to the question, how are we going to do it? It's through the democratic process. We want to restore democracy. Remember, it's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So which means your elected officials have to be representatives of your demands, of your views, of your perspective. And if we have a clear vision about the future that we want, if we want a future that's green, if we want a future that believes in science, if we want a future that believes in equity and justice, then those are the demands. And in the democratic process, If my representative doesn't believe in the future that we believe in, that's why we have elections. They're there to be unseated and replaced by people who truly believe in this common good. And I think that's what this movement has been about, not just for the last 4 years, but since 2008. There's been quite a bit of youth mobilization, the Sunrise Movement, the 99% movement and beyond, the Bernie movement, and now this joint effort to unseat Donald Trump. What a waste it would be if the majority of those individuals check out and think that we won. No, this is just a prerequisite to transform the country. There isn't going to be any positive transformation with 4 years of Trump. That's known. The question is, how do we continue this mobilization? Because it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of commitment from all of us. So I think democracy is on the table here for getting to that better future.
Great. We are running near the end of our time. Marwa, did you have anything to say?
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Kaboub. I think you did a great job at really explaining what exactly MMT is and the many possibilities. It seems that maybe more talks with the Biden campaign should continue as we all get on board to the possibilities of MMT. And I really want to point out one last thing, that there is the COVID pandemic is absolutely inherently something that is ravaging through our nation and globally, but there are many other pandemics. The death of Black and Brown people in the United States, unprecedentedly, that is a pandemic that's been going on for hundreds of years, and it's continuing on as there is no accountability. So I think what Dr. Kaboub was really pointing out here is it is about what we prioritize. What we prioritize to invest in our communities shows. We see it in who is harmed either by global pandemics like COVID. Communities, Black and Brown communities, are the ones that are reaping the absolute worst end of it. And then also climate change. When it comes to climate change, Black and Brown communities are the communities that have to withstand the worst conditions of it. And so, again, we have to invest in our people and invest in exactly what the people want. We are in an unbelievably difficult place in America right now when it comes to trust in our government. This is a wonderful opportunity to show that you as an administration are listening to what we as the people want, not just us Bernie folks or Biden folks, but also, as you pointed out, Republicans that might really just want to see true investment in the things that they genuinely care about. So thank you so much for that. And I look forward to see how this will play out in the new administration.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marwa. And you hit on a note that I heard Mr. Patel give in another panel, that the key thing for us in the coming year is to survive COVID. And if I could hand back to you, Mr. Patel, for our closing words. Thank you so much to everybody. This has been such an honor, and I think we'll look back and call this moment a historic moment. Mr. Patel, thank you.
Thank you, PG. Again, if I remissed if I don't put a plug. If anybody needs to look at the site, please visit iwillvote.com. Please go to joebiden.com. Each one of the topics that we are talking about, the campaign has done an exceptionally good job in laying out the details of each one of the topics. There are probably 35, 40 different areas, the topics that are there. So please feel free to read them. I think as Asian American Pacific Islanders and as what's going on, I think we are all in together on these things. This is the United States of America. We can't live with the divisions of the powers. And we would always be the world economic power if we continuously monitor and manage and improve upon. It's a process, the improvement, and change is difficult, but again, we have to all get on board with it, as Dr. Kaboub said. So that's my bit.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you again.
There's a big day tomorrow. You can go out to vote. And thank you for having come to our event.
Thank you much. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, Tom,
Are we off?
yeah, Tom, you can stop the recording and stop the stream.
Recording